Hi, Giselle Santa Rivera here with Rob Lee on The Truth is in This Art podcast.
And welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee. And today I have the privilege of being in conversation with a program manager for communications and narrative change at Open Society Institute, Baltimore, OSI. Please welcome Evan Serpick. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you for popping on, making the time. Wanting to chew the fat, spin a yarn with Rob Lee. I'm going to see if I can get all of them in. All of them. So I want to start off just in a very general sense or what have you. Could you because narrative change, never heard of that term before, that phrasing before. So can you describe your current work and what about OSI resonated with you?
Sure. Narrative change is sort of this phrase that everyone started using a few years ago. It became sort of a real trendy word to talk about, the stories that people tell and the stories people tell about Baltimore, the stories people tell about, people of different backgrounds and that kind of thing. So that's a relatively new part of my work. I started at Open Society in 2015. I had been a journalist my whole career and then sort of was looking to venture in a different direction. And I really love the work that Open Society has done. They've always been really, a leader in talking about criminal justice policy and youth policy, education, addiction. They have a fellowships program. So just programs that I knew and really loved. And they had an open position to be the director of communications. So that would be, helping get the word out about the work that, our fellows and our grantees and folks were doing. And I was really happy about that work. I think part of the reason I was brought in was to try to expand the base of people who knew about this work. I think it was pretty well known in philanthropy circles or donor circles, but not folks on the ground so much, or people in communities, or even really among activists and advocates. It was kind of like this organization that was on high and not really well known. So that was the work for most of my time since 2015. And then sort of 3 or 4 years ago, we started to talk about, Baltimore has a reputation. I don't know if you know this, Rob.
Oh, my stars and garters.
Yeah, it really came out since 2016, just the way, the right wing started to, talk about cities and particularly black majority cities but really cities in general as these dangerous places where nothing good happens. And, President Trump would have these awful tweets about Baltimore, and the right wing media really created this fear. And actually, I can't put it all on them because it goes back to The Wire and The Corner and all these things that sort of created this idea about Baltimore that's certainly part of the story. There's a lot of truth in The Wire, but there's so much more. And so we started to think about how do we start to, and that narrative, if you will, really hurts the city in a lot of ways.
Yes.
It hurts it in terms of the funding we get from the government. It hurts it in terms of the funding we get from the state. It hurts us in terms of tourism. It hurts us in terms of all kinds of contracts and just the work that people on the ground are doing. Advocates, we work with a lot of folks, who work in the criminal justice system and own schools and civic spaces. And basically all that work is really hurt by that narrative. So we started thinking about how can we invest in things to try to shift that narrative so people see a different side of Baltimore. And so that's when that other part of my title was added, the culture and narrative change. And so we started to invest in things like the Black Arts District, and things like certain documentaries about the city, investing in the Baltimore Beat, the new, the alternative weekly that's coming back. So things that are attempting to lift up community voices and tell a different story. So I have to say, I've been there now 7 years. I've been pretty happy with this work. It's a different kind of work than the journalism, but I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, and thank you for walking us through that because, what comes, I guess, in doing podcasting for as long as I have, 13 years, and, I remember I was a part of a network and I wanted to keep my content, but I was like, I can play well with others. And we had this one person who was in New York, and this was when Freddie Gray happened and the fallout that was attached to that. And they were talking very ill about Baltimore. And I got defensive and protective. I was like, don't you start talking about things you don't know about. And even with this podcast, going back to 2019, I remember, I think it was the second or the third episode when I had Easy Jackson on, and that was the day when Trump and Elijah Cummings were going back and forth. That's really what was the driving force of why I need to keep doing this. And I think included in what you said so well, like tourism, legislation, funding, opportunities, ultimately, like, there are other places, like, why don't we have more things being filmed here? We have interesting architecture. And I remember talking to a friend, and I've said this on this podcast before, and I was telling her about doing the series. And she was like, I'd be surprised if you could find 20 interesting people in Baltimore. So it's this notion that, and it kind of continues. It's like, it's blighted. We don't have anything. It's a disenfranchisement. And that's not really coming from here. I think what we have here is things are decentralized. And I think one of the hidden benefits of this podcast, not to toot my own horn, is it kind of enables people to see who's here. Like, oh, you're doing that here? That's really great. But a lot of times we fall for what mass media, who has no ties to this city, might just be spouting off. And I think I'll say it, but I think you were touching on it. It's almost insert black city. They're bad for whatever reason. And, it was Chicago not long ago, 700 murders or what have you. And now it's like, let's talk about the Cubbies. Let's talk about the Sox. Let's get a grinder. You touched on, like your journalism background. So let's dive into that a bit. So obviously, Baltimore, the city paper, and also your background has a stint writing for the Rolling Stone. So can you walk us through your career path and ultimately, how some of that experience in journalism really serves you even to this day? Sure.
Happy to do that. So it's been a circuitous path, but I started writing for magazines back in, I got out of college and wanted to write for newspapers, magazines, for anybody that would have me, and spent a few years just pitching myself endlessly to every magazine, every newspaper, like freelancing, just sort of hustling, trying to get little jobs where I could. And then in 2000, I got hired by Entertainment Weekly as like an editorial assistant. And that was both like a guy's assistant, like the music department's editor's assistant, and also getting to write. Like that's when I started writing some reviews, writing some, doing some interviews. So then I was promoted to a correspondent there, which I could stop answering a guy's phone calls, which was nice. And so I worked there for like 3 years writing, got some really great opportunities to interview some really cool artists. Interviewed Kanye West back when he was a producer back in the day, and had him rap to me over the phone and try to convince me he was a rapper. And I'm like, this guy was nuts. But had some great experiences. And then I actually went away to the Peace Corps for 2 years. I lived in Kenya for 2 years and then came back and took a job at it was freelancing again, took this job at Rolling Stone, which was also another great experience, just writing about music. I did write a lot about hip hop because there's a lot of really sort of rock focused folks there. And I loved hip hop. I loved rock too, but I really loved hip hop. So I got a lot of opportunities to talk to folks in that world. And was there for 4 years and then just was kind of got married, had my first son, and my wife, of all people, wanted to come to Baltimore. And I was like, really? Because, I grew up here and I was like, I just thought I would never come back. I got to New York and I was like, that's it. That was it. But, we were getting priced out of our little Brooklyn apartment and she was visiting my parents and being like, this seems nice. I was like, really? You think so? So we started looking into it, and I tried to think, well, what could I do down there? I mean, because all the media stuff is in New York. And it turned out there was an opening for a senior editor at Baltimore Magazine. So that was my job when I came back in 2008. Nice. And that was a great experience too. Developed some really good friends there. Max Weiss, who's still the editor-in-chief there, was a good friend. And so worked there for 4 years, and then the opportunity to be the editor of the city paper came up in 2012, and that was like a transformative experience. I don't know what your history is with the city paper, but I had a big, like when I was growing up, that was the Bible.
That was that was like my favorite of those, because I feel like we had a few of those kind of free-ish like available sort of publications, but that was like my favorite. Like it matched my sensibilities. And whenever I go to a different city, I was recently in Austin and I ended up seeing something that reminded me a lot of the city paper. And I was like, oh, come back. Just please bathe me.
Yeah. All the alt weeklies in every city, they were just the coolest. I mean, they were like where you like read about what you're supposed to be listening to, what you should be, what shows you should be going to. And so the fact, when I was growing up, it was way too cool for me. I wasn't that, that into what they were selling when I was like in high school. But, when I came back and had that opportunity, it was just fantastic. So I had a great experience there, incredibly hard work. It's a tiny staff and it was a great paper. And especially while I was there, it got bought by the Baltimore Sun. So I was there from 2012 to 2015. And in 2014 is when the Sun bought it. And that's when things kind of just got worse. I mean, there was a lot of financial pressure, cutting of our budget, cutting of our staff. So that was when around 2015 when I was like looking for a change. And unfortunately, 2 years later, despite incredible people working there, the Sun shut it down in 2017. So I'm really glad. I don't know how much you're up on the Baltimore beat, but I love the folks there. Lisa Snowden McCrae and Terry Henderson and Brandon Soderberg who are bringing that back.
Yeah. I've been observing, and I was glad to see that back. And I think, having the interviews, I did an interview with MTIs or what have you from the Banner a while back, and just being able to have conversations on, having competition is kind of not the right word, but I think it's in that vein, though, having different sources for the news in a print or even on a website sort of way.
Absolutely. I mean, and I actually, I've been kind of had mixed feelings about the Banner, for various reasons, but the more media, the better. I mean, this town is not covered nearly enough as it should be. So, the fact that there are people, it's sort of corporate backed and it's a lot of the same reporters from the Sun, so it's probably a similar product, but one thing they're doing now that I actually say I'm really happy about is they're bringing back like a community calendar. That's one of the things that has disappeared since the city paper, like a really comprehensive weekly, monthly calendar of all the shows, art shows, community events, music events. There's nowhere to go now. So I'm really glad they're bringing that back. I hope they do a good job.
Yeah, because I mean, when you're looking for just different things to do, they're literally, you go into, it almost autofills it in Google, things to do. And I remember being a guy that would go through like the city papers, like, all right, what's here? What should I be doing? And I might have, at one point there was this maybe Valentine's Day sort of thing that I may have put a little love letter in. I got a fair amount of attention from it. And it was like, you put me in the paper. I was like, yeah, baby, whatever you need.
Yeah, they used to do that. We used to publish Valentine's every year. Yeah. That was very cool. That
is really cool, and it's really community. And it felt like, I think, something that really matched Baltimore in that it was accessible. I think that's my thing about Baltimore. It's definitely an East Coast city, and some people say it's Southern, but it's East Coast city in my opinion, Mid-Atlantic and all of that. But it's much more accessible than a lot of these other cities. So I think you could be able to see you pop up as like as a character, as a figure within the paper. It's like, oh yeah, we have Rob's 2 cent or what have you.
Yeah. No, it was a very. I think the paper went through changes and it had good and bad years, but overall, I think it did a good job of staying in touch with the people of Baltimore and really lifting up folks, in communities and giving everybody access to, tell their story. So it was cool. I'm glad you got your 2 cents in there.
Yeah. So I want to stay on that for a little bit. What are some of the memorable stories, like whether it be through, Rolling Stone, whether it be through the city paper? What comes to mind in terms of memorable stories that you were able to contribute or report on that, really sticks out? What made them so special for you? There were certainly lots of opportunities to interview, lots of really interesting, famous people, when I was at Rolling Stone Entertainment Weekly. And, that was very cool, getting to spend time with like
Jay-Z or Beck, or just people who were sort of thoughtful and interesting and have conversations. But when I think about what I'm sort of most proud of, I do think of the city paper work, just because, as someone from Baltimore, really contributing to the sort of, the culture here and really telling the story. I mean, the work that we did around the uprising, in 2015 is really one of the most memorable weeks of my life, for sure. I mean, we had a couple of reporters at the time who were all doing great work still. Baynard Woods and Brandon Soderberg, who were sort of out every day, sort of seeing what was happening in different protest movements and talking to people and leadership. And I was out there a lot. Ed Erickson was out there. We had a couple other reporters who were out there. And we wound up working, 18-hour days to try to get as many perspectives crammed into the paper. I remember the day that things really went down, so Freddie Gray, I think, died on a Saturday. And then I might have my days wrong here, but the two big protest movements were, there was Sunday, which is, I think, when the funeral was. And then Tuesday is the day that everything broke loose at the Oriole game, I think. And so at the paper, we closed on Tuesdays. We had a whole issue that was basically set to go to the printer on Tuesday. And we just decided we had to throw it out and start over, just because there was so much to report on. And so we all stayed there all night, chronicling everything we had seen, transcribing all the people we had talked to. We had Joe Giordano was the photo editor, who had these amazing pictures from all over town, really told a story. And so we were there till 7 a.m. putting together this issue. And when I think about what I'm most proud of, that's at the top of the list. And I remember walking outside at 7 a.m. and there was 4 or 5 of us. And I was the only one who had a car, I think. So I was going to drive everybody home. And I remember the security guard was they say I got to walk you to your car. I was like, really? There's no one around for miles. But so he walked us to our car, and then we drove home. And I always remember this, but I had little kids at the time. And so I had a Kids Bop CD. So, it's 7 a.m., the morning after this crazy violence, and we're driving through the city listening to Kids Bop, dropping staff off at their houses. Really cool. That was a pretty incredible experience.
That's great. So let's talk about impact work and community work. We hear about that often, and I don't know, I'm somewhat distrusting when people say, let's talk about the impact here. It just feels weird to me. It feels like it's used, when you see impact, you don't need it to be looked at as a line item. What's the ROI on this impact? All right, Les, what is your take on community-based change, this sort of community work, this impact-oriented work? You hear all of these different things that are kind of floated around, they're used interchangeably. What is your take on it with respect to in Baltimore? How are we doing from your vantage point? How are we doing? What are the things that you're seeing?
It's funny to think about it that way, because when I sort of started at OSI, that was the big question. How do we show that we're having an impact? We're making these investments to try to improve, the standard of living here, to address poverty, to address these really entrenched long-term issues. And it's you're not going to be able to make change in a year. You're not going to be able to make change, overnight. And so, and yet, especially when we were really trying to raise money, which thank goodness we're not doing anymore. We're fully funded, but people want to see, what's the impact from last month, and and so that's a really hard thing to try to distill. But I have to say, I got involved with the ceasefire movement, Baltimore ceasefire movement, as an ambassador a few years ago, and their perspective really helped in thinking about this, because first of all, when you work with them, and really with a lot of different grassroots community level organizations, you just see just how much work is going on the ground in communities. People who are sometimes not even really part of an organization, but who are just in communities, who are holding communities down, promoting peace, promoting sort of helping people out with distributing food, with helping people out getting access to jobs or services, or just sort of these networks in communities. And imagine if people how much worse things would be if that wasn't happening.
Right.
I mean, that's sort of one of the things Ceasefire asks. Like, whenever you ask yourself, like, why isn't anybody in Baltimore doing this, which people say all the time, you're like, instead say, like, well, who is doing this now? Because they are. There's people out here who are doing incredible work every day, and they're not in the paper, they're not well known, but they're having a huge impact every day if you look for them. So I think that's kind of relates back to the narrative thing. I mean, if you actually tell the story about community leaders, and I've been privileged enough to meet incredible community leaders. I think about people like Ray Kelly, who's at No Boundaries in the Community Policing Project, or Erica Bridgeford from Ceasefire. I mean, and really every neighborhood, every community has folks like this. And you say about impact. I mean, Baltimore has this reputation. This is the good part of the reputation for being sort of a city of neighborhoods, really tight-knit communities and tight-knit neighborhoods. And it's because of those people. I mean, that's what we should be proud of, and those are the stories we should be lifting up. And then I think it's just a matter of giving those people the resources they need to have a bigger impact. And I hope that's what OSI tries to do. I mean, find ways to actually get resources and funding into the hands of folks who can actually have an impact.
Yeah, thank you. And I find that a lot of times folks in those spots are bridging those gaps that, some of those entities may not see, may not really kind of get what's happening. And, these are the people, like you said, that are on the ground, that are kind of like doing that work, and they're serving as an intermediary, or in some instances, a means to disperse some of those resources that are there. Because, that's the thing. We hear about it in how arts funds are allocated. We hear about it in how just different resources, different attention, and because so many places are underserved and there is a fair amount of scarcity, everybody wants to kind of move into that spot. I remember listening to maybe the hearing about Artscape or what have you, and just like, oh, we should have it in our district or there. It's like, yeah, but it's not happening. Or it's a parsed down version. Like, can we get to the thing where it happens first and then figure out where it goes? And it's no shots to anyone, but it does speak to maybe going into and changing how we go about things, and having vision and fresh perspective sometimes. And that's the key thing that I've kind of been seeing, and trying not to be too loud about, because I don't know everything, obviously, but in having these sorts of conversations, it opens me up, and it opens up a dialogue and discourse around more things and various perspectives to try to understand better that, okay, why is this happening? What's baked in? And how can we maybe navigate, and how can some of these ideas maybe be pitched in a different way and try to move forward? Because you can't keep trying to do these kind of old tactics while new opportunities are presented.
Yeah. I know there's this big, people talk about two Baltimores, and I think it's like a real thing. There's like, people in communities. If you go to people in communities or every neighborhood who are, living in West Baltimore, and ask them, who are the people in your community who actually get stuff done, who could actually like address some of these problems, they know. I mean, and yet the people, from the other Baltimore, the one with the money, they're not asking those people who are the people in their neighborhood who could make change. Instead, they're giving money to the same, people who have nice websites, or who have connections, or who are gatekeepers, to that community. So I think a real key thing is like you said, sort of bridging those two worlds, and letting the people who are on the ground and live in those communities tell the people with money, these are the people who you need this resource, and this is, who could really make changes,
Yeah, totally. So I got two more real questions. And then I got some rapid fire questions. I like to say they're real questions, so, people put some intention and thought around it. So, being here, leaving, coming back, I think it changes perspective, and being able to, be a journalist too here. What are some things that define a culture, specifically here in Baltimore? Like, what are three things that come to mind that when you think of Baltimore, culturally speaking, what comes to mind for you? And you definitely touched on the neighborhoods thing, which is, I think, a thing that people don't get. Like, New York talks about boroughs and all of that stuff. We got different neighborhoods, and it's very distinct between block to block sometimes.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's if I could still count that as one of my three, I think that's probably the top one. Just the way how tight-knit communities are here. Like you go to a neighborhood in Baltimore and everybody knows everybody within that community. That's not really the same in New York. I mean, you could go from one block to the next, and if they don't live in your building, you probably don't know them. And even if they do live in your building. But Baltimore's not like that. It's a really tight-knit community. To me, it's a really friendly community. I think folks here really are open to people. They're open to conversations. They're welcoming of folks who come in a good spirit. Like I think it really is a good neighborhood for people. I mean, city for people to come into. So that's certainly a big one. There's so many things to think about. I mean, in terms of the culture. One of the things that I really discovered at City Paper is Baltimore music and Baltimore club music, and that's a world that was pretty new to me before I moved back. Like growing up in Pikesville in Northwest Baltimore, I didn't really have a lot of exposure to that, but getting to meet, and listen to, some of those real pioneers, K Swift and other folks who I was exposed to, I really got to appreciate that side of that world. So maybe that's another one. And actually the dance culture is another thing that I really came to really appreciate and love. One of the more fun stories, just to jump back, that I was able to do, it was for Rolling Stone, I think, but I got to do a story about Rai Rai. Mm-hmm. The singer and the dancer, and with her, we got to hang out and watch this whole rap battle that was happening. What's the name of the club downtown that was under the bridge that's sort of not there anymore? Paradox, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, this is amazing shit. And then you saw like DDM did a great video a few years ago too, which had someone with the dance crews. So all of that stuff I think is pretty great. And I actually love the dirt bike culture too. I think that's a whole other world that gets I think that's something that instead of being shut down should be sort of fostered and appreciated.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. That's I think that's things that we definitely that ring true, and that definitely we need to get our flowers on. I was having this conversation on a documentary, and they were like, "Yeah, so what are the things about Baltimore?" And I was like, "Yeah, we need to get some more love about club music." I said it really, really weird and aggressively, and because I was like, "Yo, WAP had a club music sample from Baltimore in it. I don't care. We need to get we need to get some love."
Yeah. It's really underappreciated. It seems to me beyond a really tight knit community, which is a shame.
Yeah. So here's the next one. So I listened to a TED Talk a little while back, and it was talking about like not burying our failures, right? And you learn and you grow from these things. So tell me about a time where you failed spectacularly. I mean, journalism, deadlines are a thing. I mean, I'll put it this way. I saw a clip on a news channel here, and they were saying like, yeah, this politician this candidate did this. So they had like the ticker at the bottom and then the frame at the top or what have you. Candidate is spelled differently in each part. And I was like, I don't believe anything else you're saying here. I was like, someone didn't do their due diligence here. So tell me about a time where, in your work that you knew that you failed spectacularly, but you learned an important lesson from it.
It's a really good question, and I failed a lot, so I'm trying to focus on something. The one thing that came to my mind when you asked this was, and it's funny, you have these moments in your life that you wonder if things went differently, how different the rest of your life would have been. But so I was saying how I got out of college, and I really just wanted to write, and I didn't know if I was going to write about music, if I was going to write about politics, news. I just want to write. So I actually had a job interview and a writing test to write for the Washington Post. They had a spot in their New York bureau, and this was like a dream job for me. I could stay in New York. I could write for the Washington Post, which is sort of a legendary paper. And so I had an interview and I had a writing test. They gave me a list of facts and asked me to write like a news story. And I remember I sort of did it and was pretty much done. And then I sort of second guessed myself, and I went back and sort of rearranged the lead, the first paragraph, in a way that I didn't feel great about. And so I just turned it in, and I didn't get the job. I didn't get called back. And in retro, and I'm glad I did this. I actually called back the editor and I said, just so I know, can you tell me what what went wrong. And she's like, yeah, the written piece, it was pretty good, but the beginning was just wrong. It was sort of like I had broken it up into 2 paragraphs. And that was something that I changed, like the way my instincts were right is the short answer. Like I had written it well the first time. And I really learned from that to trust my voice a little bit, to trust my instincts. Like, and I still struggle with that because I second guess myself all the time. I think, we all do on some level. But after that, I just sort of tried to, and this helped me, as I started to write for more, magazine type journalism where you can have a little bit more voice. I started to feel more comfortable just like writing how I talk or writing, how I wanted to talk instead of like trying to say what people wanted to hear. So that was actually turned out being helpful. I do think about what would have happened if I got that job and worked my way up the Washington Post, but I can't complain about where I ended up. So.
Yeah, I've had an instance where I felt really scummy about it, where it was a job with Hopkins and it was a podcast like oriented job and you had to have a marketing background. And I was like, all right, I had this weird, I had hair. I'll just put it that way. And I had a lot of beard. I was living a very interesting lifestyle. And I remember I kind of like sold it all out because I was like, well, here's a real opportunity. And then I just like, something was telling me like, this isn't going to go. It was too many things that were like I had a beard and I shaved it all off. And then I cut my chin. I had a bad scar on it. And it was like one of those things of, you sure want to go to the interview with this bloody chin and, all of these different things. And I couldn't fit any of my suits. So I had to buy a new suit or buy 3 new suits and all of these just different things. And I'm like learning from it. Like you kind of, in a sense, sold out what was important to you, sold out what your values were, or even your burgeoning values. And for something that may or may not fit and may or may not work for you, whereas this has been working. And I think that's the key thing that I've learned from it, especially, in this spot, in doing this podcast, which is very, very important to me, very, a thing that I invested a lot of time in and got a little recognition recently, shout out to Baltimore Magazine. And, so definitely, I think, learning from those lessons where, like that interview, for instance, that's a failure for me. I didn't get the job and, it didn't work out the way that I was hoping. But I think, I learned a lot from it. And I think is very important to really take those lessons and just, you got to learn something from it. You got to learn something from those things.
Yeah. I don't remember who said it, but somebody said, I never lose. I either win or I learn.
Yeah.
So that's great.
All right, time for some rapid fire. So you know how rapid fire works. You've done a podcast before, I think. Wink, wink. Serp Daddy. So I'm going to start off with the softball. Crunchy or creamy?
Creamy.
Okay. Like just like a simple lifestyle, I see. I hear you. I prefer crunchy.
Most of my peanut butter choices and all of my food choices are driven by my children, so they like creamy. So I'm stuck on creamy.
I dig it. This is an interesting one. What is a word that you have a very hard time pronouncing?
I'm always conflicted over whether to say Caribbean or Caribbean.
Same. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I struggle with that.
What is something that with minimal information, minimal knowledge about who you are as an individual, but what is something that people tend to think you know a lot about just based on like what you present and how you pop up to a place? Yeah, Evan knows a lot about this. What do people generally think?
I give off the impression of a guy who knows a lot about food. I'm a big guy. Okay. I gotta say, like there's certain foods that I know a lot about, but for the most part, my taste is really bad. Like I eat cheap, crappy fast food. That's probably why I'm like this. But like I have no appreciation for like quality food.
I mean, if you said that you had a tourism show and you're like, yeah, I'm going to go here with a try this, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. That's what Evan's doing. That makes sense. How can I be a producer? Like, what are we doing? Yeah, kind of. I usually would get like, I get this from chefs once they know me a lot, once they know me a little bit, not a lot. And they're like, oh, you're a food snob. I was like, what do you mean? I had chefs like, I don't even know if I want to cook for you, bro. You're a little bit of a snob.
Really?
I was like,
wow.
Yeah. I'll tell you who once we're done here.
Right.
go-to pastime. If, like you have a few moments or what have you, and you're like, I want to just kill some time, but it's something enjoyable. What is a go-to pastime for you?
I got to say, I love tennis. I love to watch tennis, love to play tennis. So actually today, I love working from home. For one thing, the City Open is happening this week, which is tennis tournament in DC. So I'm actually going on Saturday, but even during the day, I'm skipping out of work to watch the tennis channel. So that's how I spend my time.
I had a really cool, I'll call it my European, weekend. Me and my partner, me and my girlfriend, we went up to Philly a couple of years back, and this is when we first became aware of Frosé. So we got Frosé on a rooftop bar. We were watching tennis, and just legs crossed. I was like, come out with the Yucas Bravas, thank you. More of the gabagool, more of the stuff. Yeah. And none of that was for her because she doesn't eat meat, so all that was just for me. Oh, okay. It's like the alcohol is for you, the meat is for me. So this is the last one. And I'm hoping to get a good one. I'm hoping to get a good one from you, because usually people haven't been able to really ride this train. So usually the question is, tell me a joke. But then people are like, I'm on the spot, I don't know what to say. So I'm going to frame it a little differently. Now, I have extra points if this is somehow funny. What is a word that you hate hearing?
I do have a good joke if you want me to throw out a joke.
You can throw out a joke, please.
Because I don't have a good word. I mean, I don't like the word moist, but nobody likes the word moist.
Thank you. I literally was saying moist.
But my joke, I just told this actually with some friends, and it got a good response. So a guy goes to prison, and he's sitting in the dining room, and he sees a guy stand up, and the guy yells out 36, and everybody laughs, cracks up hysterically. And 10 minutes later, another guy stands up. He says 47. Everybody laughs. He's like, and then waits a little while. And then 5 minutes later, there's another guy who yells out 29, and the room dies. They're laughing hysterically. And the guy turns to the guy next to him. He's like, "What the hell's going on? Why is everybody?" He's like, "Well, we've all been here so long and telling the same jokes that instead of telling the joke, we just say the number of the joke, and everybody laughs." He's like, "Oh, all right, that's pretty weird, but all right." So the next day, he's all excited. He goes back into the lunchroom, and he stands up on his chair and he yells out 29. Nobody laughs. Crickets. Nothing. So he turns to the guy next to him. He's like, what the hell happened? Yesterday, that was a big hit. He's like, "You didn't tell it right."
I like it.
That's my joke.
I like it. So there you have it, folks. I want to thank Evan Serpick for coming on to the podcast. And I want to invite and encourage you to tell the fine folks where to check you out. And the floor is yours.
Thanks. I don't have much to follow. I mean, I do work for OSI Baltimore. I think they do great work. But actually, if you're going to support anybody, support the Baltimore Beat, which is comeback Black-owned, Black-led newspaper that I think Baltimore really needs. So go help them out.
So there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Evan Serpick for coming on to the podcast. And I am Rob Lee, saying that there is art, community, just good things happening in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for it.